The late Eugene Peterson once said, "Worship stirs deep responses of adoration which are formed into rhythms and melodies of gratitude and enlists the voices of creatures from every corner and century, putting them tunefully to work in praise." Worship centers, gathers, reveals, sings, and affirms. Worship of God is part of our created order. Our bodies were made to worship God. Sometimes this practice comes easily and is a delight, but what about when God feels distant or when challenging circumstances wear down our hearts and minds? Why should we worship in times of trouble? Nestled right in the middle of our Bible is a collection of poetry, hymns, and prayers. The book of Psalms has been the songbook of God's people for thousands of years. Readers are invited to embrace every single condition of the human heart. So in these texts, we find songs of thanksgiving, praise, petition, wisdom, and lament. And yet, almost 1/3 of the Psalms are psalms of lament, expressing deep sorrow and crying out to God. In these prayers, we hear phrases like, "God, have you forgotten me? My heart is breaking. Why are you so far away? Please have compassion on me, Lord. I am worn out." These are honest confessions of disorientation, begging God for a way out, begging for understanding. Often in church, we are unsure or nervous about expressing this kind of pain and lament because it involves vulnerability. But could it be that standing in vulnerability, expressing fear and pain before God and our communities, could actually reaffirm our trust and belief in God's goodness? Old Testament scholar and theologian Walter Brueggemann came up with a paradigm for life's rhythms and used it often in his study of the Psalms. Orientation is the first space we exist in, where most things make sense and life is generally good. Then we move into a place of disorientation, where we experience suffering and confusion. Afterward, we come back to a place of reorientation in which we experience God's closeness and are more deeply aware of His presence. This pattern is everywhere in the Psalms. Songs and prayers that affirm our belief in God and gratitude for His goodness are followed by songs that express deep sorrow and fear, and close behind those are songs that speak to the fortitude and hope we carry as people of God, saying, "And yet I will praise you. The Lord will answer my prayer. His promises are your armor and protection." What a gift that in this painfully broken world, the Scriptures model what complete vulnerability before God looks like. It is an act of worship unlike any other, that even in our darkest moments, God is still holy, is still good, still faithful, and still worthy of being worshiped. Some years ago, I was officially diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. Anxiety was stealing from my relationships, affected my presence at work, kept me from sleeping, and eventually it felt like my whole personality was altered. I didn't know how to fix it or where to turn. I remember asking some of those same questions the psalmist writes. "God, have you forgotten about me? Where are you? I thought you loved me, but this doesn't feel like love." The amount of fortitude required to show up and lead worship for my church or complete assignments for seminary classes felt impossible. I grew so weary. When I finally had the courage to share with a couple close friends what I was struggling with, I described my days as the woman in the New Testament reaching for the hem of Jesus' garment just to feel close to Him and to be healed. Thankfully, in the wake of what felt like a vulnerability hangover, I was met with compassion and love from my friends. I could tell I needed a space to weep and feel overwhelmed in the presence of Jesus. And to my surprise, the more I faced my grief, anxiety, and doubts of God's faithfulness, or the more I articulated the debilitating experience of my anxiety, the more my heart was stirred with a longing for Jesus. My heart desperately desired the closeness of Jesus, and my trust in Jesus actually grew. I've learned over the last several years that worshiping in times of trouble is not just a good idea, but is critical for the flourishing of the people of God. Lamenting is part of what it means to be human. Life feels so fragile, and it can be hard to be certain of anything. But when we sit in God's presence as our vulnerable, authentic selves, our intimacy with Jesus grows, and we become more aware of our dependency on Christ. This kind of worship belongs in the story of faith. A psalm I am particularly drawn to in hard seasons is Psalm 91. This is technically a psalm of thanksgiving, but I love it because it speaks to the grief and hardship that the writer had previously experienced. Instead of pushing away the story of pain as if it never happened, it provides an assurance of God's protection. Listen to these words. "Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find rest in the shadow of the Almighty. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. For he will rescue you from every trap and protect you from deadly disease. He will cover you with his feathers. He will shelter you with his wings. His faithful promises are your armor and protection. The Lord says, I will rescue those who love me. I will protect those who trust in my name. When they call on me, I will answer. I will be with them in trouble. I will rescue and honor them. I will reward them with a long life and give them my salvation. This prayer speaks the peace and character of Christ into our hearts. The God we worship is faithful to keep his promises, even when he feels far away. Psalm 91 encourages us to continue to love, continue to follow, and continue to worship. As we close this video, I invite you to sit back and let the words from this song, Peace by Hillsong Young and Free, play over you. This song reminds me that peace is a promise, and no circumstance, loss, confusion, or heartache can prevent the promises of God from breaking forth. May this song be a prayer and an act of worship for you.
You will stay true, even when the lies come. Your word remains truth, even when my thoughts don't line up. I will stand tall on each promise you made. Let the rest fade away. There's a peace far beyond all understanding. May it ever set my heart at ease. Dare anxiety come, I'll remember that peace is a promise you keep. Peace is a promise you keep. You will stay true, even in the chaos. Your word remains truth, even when my mind wreaks havoc. I will be still, for I've known all along. My Jehovah Shalom, there's a peace far beyond all understanding. May it ever set my heart at ease. What anxiety fails to remember is peace is a promise you keep. Peace is a promise you keep. You are peace to a restless soul. Peace when my thoughts wage war. Peace to the anxious heart. That's who you are. That's who you are. You are peace when my fear takes hold. Peace when I feel enclosed. Peace when I lose control. That's who you are. That's who you are. I found peace far beyond all understanding.